Good afternoon, parents, and apologies for the very short delay there. We had a couple of technical issues, so I do apologise for starting a few minutes later today. I hope you're all safe and well, as always, and that you've had a safe and relaxing weekend. As always, these sessions are recorded, just to remind everybody, so that you can watch them back at a later date or watch them for the first time if you've not been able to join us today. So this session is the last in a series of webinars for this half term, and this one is about understanding your child's progress report. It links very much to one of the previous sessions that we held about the assessment of children at GEMS Founders. So hopefully, if you think of this being a big jigsaw puzzle, hopefully the little bits and pieces of information that you're getting through these webinars are helping to piece together that jigsaw. And this is a question we get asked a lot about, how to sort of dissect and understand in more detail the progress reports that we put out, but also it links a lot to the assessment system, which we are still working very hard to develop and really trying hard with our parents and our students and our teachers to make sure that we provide as much information as possible, so that everybody understands it, and that we can use the information that is provided to support your children as they progress through GEMS Founders School. As always, the live question chat function is open, so please do post comments or thoughts or questions, and as always, I'll try to answer them throughout the session. And moving forward after the half-term break, there'll be another series of webinars that lead us up to the spring break, and those webinars will be designed around the questions and the comments and the feedback that we get from parents on a day-to-day and on a week-to-week basis. So hopefully these sessions have been useful. As always, in line with our vision, it's something that we're regularly revisiting, not just during these webinars, but during our day-to-day school lives, with our students, with our teachers, with our leadership team, and actually making sure that we try to connect everything to our vision, and also to our mission as well. And it's always about these three very important words to us as a community. And like I said, if you want to post in the chat what this means to you, it's always great to get the feedback on the vision and what it means to you as parents as well. But today we're going to connect this vision to the session, and obviously in terms of reporting, I think it's pretty self-explanatory that a report does indicate success, whatever that might mean throughout the academic year for every individual child, and every individual child is different. But it also provides information so that you can grow and hopefully flourish with the information that you have. And this session again will be not just talking about the reports and how to understand them, but a reflection and further information about the assessment system, and a little bit of a repetition of the assessment webinar that we had earlier in this term, so that we can start to understand it in more detail. Again, thinking about staying in the present, often students, when they get the report cards, when parents see the report cards, there's a tendency, natural tendency of course, to reflect on what has gone well and what we can improve. Absolutely, and that's a really important part of the reporting system. And it's also about thinking about the future and thinking about how we're going to get to the next stage. But it's really important as well to think about the present moment, and again using that practice of mindfulness to stay present as well, because there's certain things in our lives that we can and cannot control, and there's certain things in the future that we can that we simply cannot control. So understanding that when you're going through your child's report, and making sure that they're aware of that, and also thinking about the other bits of information that we have that surround, that make up this report, that can also be used when you have discussions at home with your children. Next slide, please. So just a reminder about assessment terminology, and this is really, really important for parents to be aware of, and obviously students to be aware of as well. There's lots of different ways that schools assess children, and there's lots of ways that schools obtain lots of information about children. And some of that, a lot of it, most of it actually, comes through formative evaluation and assessment. So those day-to-day assessment procedures that take place. Sometimes students will have no idea that they're being assessed. And what I mean by that is that could be through observational data. It could be just that good morning when they reached school and have those conversations at the gate with myself and my colleagues, all the way ranging from those day-to-day interactions to the class interactions, to the behaviours, to the attitudes in class, and reaching all the way to assessments and tests and quizzes and exams. So all of that information that we obtain on that day-to-day basis is deemed as formative assessment, and those end of unit assessments, those big assessments that assess a wider range of time or a wider range of pieces of work or content, such as examinations or mock examinations, or end of term tests, would be classed as summative. And through that information, we as a school and teachers try to gather that and also piece it together to create a best fit when we report to parents. And it's very important that students and parents are aware about all the assessment terminology in terms of Key Stage 3, so years 7, 8 and 9, is on our website in the form of the rubrics, the assessment rubrics, and you can get that through the curriculum section of our website and then dig a bit deeper into the assessment section of our website. And as stated in previous sessions, students can access this information from the QR codes that are printed on the front of their exercise books in school. Next slide, please. Two other bits of very important information, progress and attainment. The first one is talking about moments in time and the measurement of two key points in time. Now that might be during a lesson, the start and the end of a lesson. It could be the start of a school year and the end of a school year. It could be between the end of the school year and the end of another academic year. So progress is a measurement in gains of knowledge, skills and understanding that can be sustained over a period of time, essentially. And that's a very, very important piece of information that we have on all children in this school. Attainment is pitched against curriculum standard, or a standard that a student has reached. And again, that might be a 9 or an 8 in terms of GCSE grades, or an A star to E in terms of A-level grades, or it might be one of those grades on the Key scale. It might be a percentage on a test. So in terms of attainment, a very, very important measure as well. But again, we use progress and attainment data to create the information needed to report to parents and to children at different points throughout the year. So just a reminder in terms of our scale, I can remember 5.5 years ago, when we started to look at this scale at GFS, this 9-point scale. And the reason, again, to remind parents why it's a 9-point scale is because most of the things that we have in terms of assessment at GFS are based on a 9-point scale. The way we internally measure students, the way students are externally measured, the 1 to 9 GCSE scale. We also have something called stay 9s or standard 9s, which are part of the way students are evaluated externally as well. And so we thought that 9-point scale was very important because it does link to pretty much everything else that happens in terms of assessment within and so this scale here, we decided that the S1, the secure one, is defined as our curriculum standard. Now that is the standard that we measure students against at the end of each academic year for Key Stage 3, for students in years 7, 8 and 9. Of course, not every student is going to be at an S1. Some may reach that standard, some may not reach that standard, some may go beyond that standard. So when we talk about that in qualitative terms, we're talking about working towards a standard. You see those levels E1, E2, D1 and D2. We can see at the standard, S1, and then we have 4 levels above, and well above the standard S2, S3, M1 and M2. Now that's at the end of the academic year in terms of those descriptors. Obviously, we report to parents on different points, of the academic year. Parents will have received the Progress Check 1 report, and your child will have placed for each of his or her subjects somewhere on this scale. Now, some children, like I said, in Progress Check 1 will be below S1, some will be at S1, and some might have even exceeded S1. Even at Progress Check 1, at Progress Check 2, we do the same thing, and so on and so forth until we reach the end of year and report to parents about the end of year attainment. So I think that the thing that we need to remember is that every child is different, of course. Every child has different pathways, and they'll find a way of getting to their goals, to their targets, if you like, their own way. And that's really important to factor in. There is this, I suppose, obsession to compare and to contrast when it comes to assessment information and reports. I certainly did that when I was a child. I wanted to know how I compared to my friends, how I compared to other people in the class, how I compared to other people in the school. And children these days are pretty much no different. But what is really important is that that we keep emphasizing to our children, to your children, that really what they need to be controlling is themselves. And that's really the only thing that they have in their control. And sometimes students lose sight of this a little bit. So we need to, as parents and as teachers and as school leaders, make sure that whilst it's interesting to compare data, that is out of his or her control. So concentrating on themselves and how well they're doing in each of the different subjects, and understanding, more importantly, what their strengths are and what their areas for development are, is absolutely crucial information to help them improve in terms of their attainment and to their progress. So hopefully that just helps parents understand a bit about the internal assessment. Now the external assessment, like I said, much of which is also on a 9-point scale. You can see the GCSEs there on a 1 to 9, and what we call stay 9s or standard 9s, also on a scale of 1 to 9. So when we get the CAP 4 reports back, the cognitive ability test reports back, and when we get the progress test in English, maths and science results back, they're on what we call a standard 9 scale, 1 to 9. And again, both of which 5 we have defined as our curriculum standard. When students get to A level, the scale changes. We cannot change that scale. We're not an examination board. And the scale for A levels is an A star A, B, C, D and E, where the curriculum standard is set at a C. Next slide, please. So again, this really is what we call a flight path. When we're looking at a child's report, and when you're looking at your child's report, you will look at where they're currently at, perhaps how they've improved from a previous report, or perhaps not, maybe they've stayed the same. And sometimes students may have not improved at all and maybe have dropped a level. And I'll talk a little bit about how that can happen throughout an academic year in terms of the way we assess. But essentially, if all things were perfect, and things in life are not perfect, if all things were perfect and everything was perfectly linear, we would have what you see on the screen, where children in year 7 at the end of the year, for example, if they ended on an S1 and then they ended on an S1 in year 8 and an S1 in year 9, they would be on a trajectory, or what we call a flight path, that probably would result in the students achieving a C, if you like, or a level 4 or a level 5 in terms of the exam boards that we currently use. So the journey will be bumpy. It will be a bumpy road, and it will fluctuate from report to report, of course. But going back to what I said just a minute ago, it's about understanding, one, what that level actually means. And that information is very clearly explained on our school website for all the subjects across Key Stage 3. It's also explained very clearly in terms of GCSE grades through all of the different specifications and information that's presented on the GCSE and IGC board websites, so Oxford AQA, AQA, and Pearson Edexcel. Now, just a reminder that behind each of these blocks and behind each of those 9 grades at GCSE level, we decided to implement a plus and a minus element within each block. So a student could end up on an S1 plus or an S1 minus, for example, or just an S1. Now, that's really important to understand, because if a child is at an S1, let's say, for example, an S1 at this progress check report, and then move to an S1 plus in the next, there has been gains in learning, and that child is making progress. So those used to be referred to as sub-levels, if you like, but we refer to them as a plus or a minus element, which breaks down that information in each of these blocks further. And that really helps teachers assess students more accurately. Next slide, please. Again, just a reminder that this is more of a reminder before we actually start looking at a couple of reports. The comparison between what was the old grading structure for many of our examination boards to what it is now, and everything that we use at GFS currently is assessed on a 9-to-1 scale. Next slide, please. And again, a reminder about the 2-year A-level course. The maximum grade a child can receive at the end of year 12 or at AS level is an A, whereas the A-level, the full A-level course over those 2 years, the maximum grade a child can receive is an A star. And then obviously the scale you can see, or the scales you can see in front of you, obviously all of those grades are available throughout that course. Okay, next slide, please. So as part of your child's progress check report, you will have an attainment grade, which is measured to give you and your child and the school an indication of where your child is currently at. And that will happen in progress check 1, 2, and 3, and then an overall grade will be created at the end of the academic year. Alongside that, we are also evaluating and assessing what we refer to as learning skills. Now, previously, before we had high performance learning, HPL, we had something called the Learning Hive, and students were also assessed in terms of the different values, attitudes, attributes, and lots of different characteristics that they will obtain throughout their academic lives. And when we decided to move across to high performance learning, we had to sort of rethink a little bit, to a certain extent, how we're going to assess these different, what we call affective, I suppose, attributes. And this is one of the hardest, in my opinion, hardest domains to assess, where you have to try to assess empathy, agility, hard work, effort. These are very difficult aspects to evaluate and to assess, but there are ways of doing this. And what you can see on the screen are the descriptors, all the way from outstanding. Sorry, on the screen, sorry, is the outstanding, but we have descriptors that run all the way from outstanding to throughout the different levels that a child can get on the report. And we have got on there, as you can see, some very clear descriptors. So when teachers are assessing children, what they will be looking at is their attainment grade, their academic grade, from a variety of different things, but they'll also be looking at how students are performing in terms of these values, attitudes, attributes, and then the ACPs, which again you can see listed on the screen there. So usually speaking, there is a connection between the learning skills grade and the attainment grade, but sometimes there's not. And it's a question I get asked quite a lot about: how come my child is on a really high level grade in terms of our scale, but perhaps the learning skill descriptor is not as perhaps good, or doesn't quite reflect what the attainment grade is saying? And that can happen, like I said, for lots of different reasons. If I put it into sort of sporting terms, if you like, if you had two athletes at the start of a 100-meter running track, and we asked them both to run 100 meters as fast as they possibly could, and the two people on the starting line, one was a world-class professional sprinter, and the other one was not. Now, what you would see there is that the world-class athlete would most likely win the race. But if you were to compare the effort that they had given to win the race, they may not have had to put in as much effort because of their ability. So that's sort of a brief analogy that I use when I try to explain this to students, and it's something that we need to consider about when you talk to your children. Some things come very easy to children, and they don't have to apply a lot of effort to things, and it just comes naturally, and that can happen. So it doesn't mean to say that they shouldn't apply more effort and more hard work and things like that, but it can happen. So I want parents to understand why there could be sometimes a disconnect between the two grades. Next slide, please. We can go to the next one. Sorry, I've just explained that. Thanks. So in terms of the information, and again, this is a general reminder about what we call the data triangle and the Mona Lisa effect, and we've done a lot of work with this year, is that we need to be acutely aware of three different parts of this triangle. If we can just click the next three and then pause, thank you. So the three sides to this, or three vertices of the triangle, attainment, ability or aptitude, and attitude are all bits of information that we have to gather, and we do gather to make our judgments at any given moment in time. This is very much the hard data that we have on children, and we have lots of other soft data as well that we must take into consideration when assessing young people. So again, a reminder that attainment, that measure at the end of a unit or a scheme of work or a topic or a year or a GCSE course or an A-level course. Attitude, all of that information that we gather through the pupils' attitudes to self and school survey that we run out, the Dubai Wellbeing Census that is conducted every year, and all of the other information that I've just talked about in terms of values, attitudes, and attributes falls under that part of the triangle. And then the Cat 4, the potential, the cognitive potential or aptitude or ability, gives us an indication, and it is just an indication, it's not a prediction, but it gives us an indication of where your child may be at the end of a particular phase of their education. So all of this information is used when reported to parents. Again, this is just data that we have as a school. You can see from a cognitive ability test where children are assessed, and it gives what's called a standard age score. So children are assessed in 4 different batteries: how they think with words, the verbal section, how they think with number, how they think with shape, and how they think with shape and space. And it gives us a really good profile about where those children's strengths may lie and their skills may lie, and what potentially might be interesting for them to pursue in the future. And we have this information, and you can see just as an example here, this particular child's score would indicate that their non-verbal and spatial reasoning is higher than their verbal and quantitative. And with that information, we need to use that to understand the child more. It could be that the child has English as a second language, and that we need to look at that in a lot more detail and support them with that. This could indicate that the child potentially, because their verbal and their non-verbal and spatial scores are a little bit higher, they might have interest in certain subjects, potentially some of the STEM subjects, the science, technology, engineering, and mathematical subjects. But it's just an indication based on one test. But it isn't a piece of information, and these pieces of information don't give us any answers. They do not give answers to anything. They simply raise questions and more questions. And they raise what we call flags, if you like, indications of what we should do in terms of how we can modify our lessons or our assessments or our interactions with children based upon the information that we have to use. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a Key Stage 3 progress report. And for any parent in year 7, 8 and 9, this will look familiar to you. If your child's in year 7, they would have a 7 D2 plus, for example, year 8 and 8 D2 plus. And in this case, this is a year 9 child's report, where of course it's the number 9. Now you can see on this report that this particular profile is varied across different subjects. And if we use English as an example, this particular student, at Progress Check 1, the teacher feels that this child has a secure understanding, an S1, the curriculum standard, at this given point in time. Whereas in mathematics, they've reached a 9 E2, so they're emerging, but they're at the top end of that emerging scale. And so on and so forth with the different subjects. So what you will do with this information, or what children can do with their parents and with their teachers, is they will look very carefully at each of their Progress Check 1 grades, which again has been calculated from a variety of information, not just one test, not just 2 tests, but a variety of information that we feel, that the teachers feel, best reflects your child's performance at any given point in time, in this case, Progress Check 1. So the next thing as parents, what I would do is when you get the child's report, your child's report or your children's report, is sit down with them and actually talk to your child about each of these levels that they've reached for each of the subjects, but also talk about the learning skills as well. And making sure that you have the GEMS Founders School website or the QR codes available from the fronts of the exercise books, and go to the relevant sections to actually break down what makes up a 9D2, for example, in art, or a 9S1 in computer science, or a 9D2 in French, for example, and look at those key words and key bits of terminology that will help not just only your child, but you as parents understand a bit more about what they can do. You can then start looking at the grades above and about what skills, what knowledge, what understanding they need to obtain to move further forward in their learning and to progress in terms of their knowledge, skills and understanding. So again, this profile is nicely balanced if you look at it. You could certainly, if this was my child, I would be asking about subjects such as food tech, French and geography on here, all very similar levels, 9D2, 9D2 plus, and the learning skills being judged as acceptable. It would be quite an interesting conversation to have. One, because it's a new subject to our school, food technology. 2, to kind of understand why the child, why our sons and why our daughters think that their learning skills are acceptable from a student's lens and perspective. And then to have that conversation, if required, with the teacher of that subject. But it's really about students taking as much ownership as possible of these report cards and actually being able to confidently articulate why they think they have obtained a certain level, and more importantly, what they're going to do next to continue to progress. And those are the conversations that need to happen both in school and at home, and it should be student-led. I find the students who make the most progress generally are students who are able to articulate clearly and carefully their next steps to their teachers, to themselves, to their friends, to their parents, and that takes time to develop that confidence to do that, the skill to do that, and also having the information to do that as well. But that's a really nice thing to do at home with your children when you do get a report card. Again, as we move through the year groups, next slide please, the report cards will look almost identical. Obviously, the only difference is in terms of the numerical rating now on that 1 to 9 scale. So this particular student has got a very good learning skills profile in terms of good in most subjects and 2 very good ratings in history and sociology, for example. Conversation here might be to look and dig a little bit deeper about what's happening in Arabic as a Ministry of Education subject. But don't forget that every child is different, every child is unique. And again, going back to that sort of obsession to get the very highest grades, that might be relevant to some students and it might not to other students. So we've got to be very careful as educators to understand that maybe in this case, an English literature grade of a 4 has meant that that child has worked incredibly hard and has actually really starting to meet his or her potential. And sometimes when we start comparing to another student or the class or to the year group or to the school or to the wider Dubai or country or international even, we've got to be very careful not to affect that child's confidence, that child's profile, if you like, by saying that you need to do more and more to get to that 9 or to get to that 8 or whatever it may be. Because that 4 might be realistically where that child is at, and that might be in terms of our vision, the very first slide that we showed, school vision, that might mean success to that particular child. So please think about it in the context of your own child, and that every child is unique and individual, and that we've got to really personalize the next steps for each child with the information that we have. And that applies to Key Stage 5 on the next slide. It's absolutely no different. Again, this is a very strong report in terms of outstanding and very good learning skills. It's clear that this particular student, you know, is in terms of their values, attitudes, and attributes, and their cognitive characteristics, is doing very well. And obviously in psychology, getting that grade A. Now the question, I suppose, is that where that child needs to be? Is that where it's realistic to be, or is that child underperforming and maybe they do need to get to that A star, or that's where they feel they should be at or could be at? So we need to think about this in terms of every grade, every child in every subject. Next slide, please. Just to add a little bit more context again in terms of the attitudes, because what I think we see as a school, and I'm sure you do as parents, particularly throughout the pandemic, is that students' attitudes, their well-being, you know, their learning skills to a certain extent have been affected, and that is for sure. And it's not just in our school; it's across schools worldwide, where students have obviously been through lockdown, they've been through online and remote learning and blended learning, and then back to school and so on and so forth. It's been a very complex and complicated couple of years for them, and it's, I think, real testament to children, to young people, not just at Founders but across the world, that they've shown that grit and that determination and that resilience to keep going during a very difficult time. I certainly can't imagine having gone through this or going through this when I was a child. I can't really understand it in terms of what that must feel like, but we have to engage with children to understand them more, and that comes through some very what we call soft data in terms of the day-to-day interactions we have with them, the observations, what their aspirations are, what their hopes are, what their dreams are, and things like that. And we need to factor all of this in when we do report to children, and more importantly, when we have the conversations with children about their progress and their attainment. We are doing a lot of work currently where we want to almost shift our focus a little bit to look at the well-being data that we have on children in our school. Again, we've become obsessed as a profession about attainment and progress data, and comparing, contrasting, and ranking, and all of that, which is really important. It's really, really important. But well-being data essentially is all of that data that we have in school. So even your child's progress check 1 report is well-being data. We can look at that information and say your child is at a 4 or 5. What information might that provide us as teachers and as a school and you as a parent about their well-being? Because it could provide a lot of information, and it could be that sort of catalyst, that trigger, that piece of information that helps unlock some potential, or like I've talked about in previous sessions about what is going on underneath the mask, the metaphorical mask, that children wear every day when they come to school. So think about everything, please, that I've said in this webinar, in terms of what we can do and of what information we have. And as always, it will be really lovely in the chat if you would like to publish any questions or thoughts or comments. And I can't see any at this stage, so I can't really answer anything at this stage at the moment. But if you do want a follow-up session, as always, please get in touch with me or one of our team or one of our teachers or one of our leaders, and we can certainly help you understand this in more detail. I hope this session has been useful again, and I certainly look forward to wishing all of your children a very safe and enjoyable and healthy and happy spring break next week, and look forward to seeing as many parents as possible in the next webinar, which will be held on the Monday after we return from half term. Stay safe, love to you and your families, and we look forward to seeing you again shortly. Thank you, everybody.